Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our panelists for a report from Washington. Crucial insights for advisors, moderated by the IAA's Vice President of Government Relations, Neil Simon.
Coming up, guys. Sit wherever you would like. Good afternoon. I hope you all haven't gotten your fill of policy, because we're going to be giving you a whole bunch. And I have just an extraordinary group of people here on this panel to help us out with that. So I'm going to go from my left, your right, all the way on down. To my left, not politically, is Jeff Brown.
That's hard to be.
Very nice, thank you. Senior Vice President, Legal and Regulatory Affairs for Charles Schwab. Came out of SEC Market Reg way back when, and for some reason had something to do with building the securities market in Romania.
Very true.
Next down, Langston Emerson. He's a partner at Mindset. Mindset is a public policy shop that IAA has had the honor of working with for the past year to help build up our influence on Capitol Hill. Spectacular firm. Langston is a principal of that. He's an alum of working on the House and Senate side, and I think he worked for the AIC, representing private equity funds. He's been around. Next down, Jim Febio. I think you've already met from Fidelity. What hasn't been mentioned, I don't think, is that Jim is a governor of the IAA. And then lastly is Mara Schreck, who is head of regulatory affairs for JP Morgan Asset Management. Has also worked at ICI, Ropes and Gray, and a whiz on regulatory affairs. Now, first off, and we're going to have a panel discussion. We're going to leave time for questions and hopefully answers. First, I want to apologize for the obvious lack of diversity on this panel. Yes, everyone here has a law degree. Okay. First question, government shutdown, yes or no? Jeff?
No.
Anybody think otherwise?
No.
End of the fiscal year is coming right up. It looks like the deal has been cut on the Hill. Joe Manchin is not getting his permitting proposal through, which looked like it was a holdup, so the government, for better or worse, will continue operating. Okay, we're going to jump into the issues. I had already mentioned at the first panel this morning that two issues that IAA has made a priority are retirement savings, and there is legislative happening on that. The other one has to do with anti-money laundering. So let's start off with those two issues. Jim, you want to touch upon the SECURE Act and what's going on, and what the hell is Rise and Shine?
Part of the congressional nomenclature. Sure. So I think we've all heard of SECURE Act 1.0, and then quickly after, the retirement champions on Capitol Hill started building what's now commonly referred to as SECURE 2.0. However, in the Senate, as Neil referenced, the Help Committee and the Finance Committee came up with different names, one Rise and Shine, one the EARN Act. This will all come back together and be called one thing at the end, hopefully. I think there's process questions as Congress adjourns this week. It's viewed as something to get done, would have to be done on a year-end wrap-up package after the election. I'll get to why I think there's a decent chance of that in a minute. But there's a lot of goodness in this bill to enhance and expand retirement savings. Increasing the retirement minimum distribution age to 75, and now it's phased in. And I think folks in this room are probably saying, that's too complex, don't make us go educate everybody. But the net effect is to try to get to 75 so people can stay invested longer due to the budget scoring rules. They've stretched out how it would get implemented. Startup credits for small businesses to start a plan. Enhanced catch-up contributions in your 60s. the ability to make a match into the 401k for a student debt payment. I don't know how useful that one's going to be now that student debt's being forgiven, but I think there will still be folks that it would be good to have that incentive. Loosening the rules on the 403b side to allow collective investment trusts to be included in 403b plans. There's too much in there to go into all of it. There are even just some good administrative pieces like suppressing the need to send paper disclosures to all of your participants who are not enrolled in the plan. Common sense change. There is one little snafu that we're continuing to work on, and that's AARP's insistence that plan participants get mailed a plan statement at least annually, even those who've already affirmatively said, please stop sending me all that paper. So we're going to keep working on that. These different versions of the bills have to get married up. The House passed the bill with a stunning 415 vote, bipartisan vote in the House. I think that gives them an outsized amount of leverage to say our provisions need to stay in. There's some difference in nuanced provisions in the Senate bill. Does this come together? I think with Chairman Neal's leadership, you have Kevin Brady retiring, you have Senator Portman retiring, and so as part of their legacy, I think that gives it a lot of impetus for leadership to get this over the goal line. But strange things happen in lame duck sessions. Sometimes people win and say, I want to do it my way once I have the gavel. And so I think there's, the jury will still be out. I remember Secure Act 1.0, I think it was 3/4 quarters in a row. We predicted that bill was going to cross the goal line before it finally did. So that's probably a longer-winded answer than you wanted.
It's all good. Langston, the bill's up before the Senate. There are not that many legislative days left before the midterm elections. Do you think this is going to get to the floor before the midterms, or is it more likely to come up during the lame duck session?
Short answer, lame duck.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah.
And by the way, we have a member alert. We have a Take Action Now on our website to allow you to write your senators and members of the Congress about the importance of retirement savings legislation. Please, the more letters they get, the more communication, the more likely it is to be enacted into law. Okay, I also mentioned that we wanted to talk a little bit about the defense authorization bill. As I mentioned earlier today, why? Because there are provisions in it, at least in the House-passed version, that would impose AML, anti-money laundering regs, on financial intermediaries, including investment advisors. Langston, to you, what do you see happening on that? Is that provision going to survive?
It's doubtful, and it is a provision that Democrats in the House push quite a bit to expand the definition or the grasp, if you will, of the financial institutions to pull in more, as you alluded to, as it relates to AML. It's called the Enablers Act, as it's become known, and it was included in the National Defense Authorization Fund, or Authorization Act, which is a must-pass bill on an annualized basis. And the thought is that this go-round, they are looking at adding the Enablers Act, or keeping it in, as it moves its way through the Senate. The negotiations as it relates to the NDAA are most often done between the four corners, if you will, the Armed Services Committees in both the House and the Senate, as well as leadership in the House and Senate. And it's typically a bipartisan measure. A lot of what they call extra additions, if you will, that have little to do with defense, if you will, that are added on have to have approval by the Committee of Jurisdiction. In this case, the Enablers Act would have to have approval by the Banking Committee. The Democrats are for it, but Senators Toomey, the ranking member, as well as McHenry, the ranking member in the House Financial Services Committee, are both opposed and have stood strong on that point. So to that degree, there will be some opposition moving forward, which means the likelihood of it being included is slim to none.
And by the way, there is a meeting in Senator Toomey's office tomorrow during Advisor Advocacy Day, and for you Pennsylvanians who will be attending that meeting, please raise that issue. I see a couple hands being raised. Please raise that issue, and when they respond that they are working to get it removed, thank them. That's what Advisor Advocacy Day is all about, making some friends and trying to persuade people to to positions that are
You know, one
benefit.
point on this, if I'm not mistaken, and I could be, there were in a previous NDAA, AML provisions were added, and so there's kind of a history to adding this type of language to it, and so that is troubling. And so I really urge you to reach out to your senators, because this can be stopped, but they can go along because, oh, we've done this before, this is just a little bit more, we can do it again. So
It's a good point.
And as I believe I mentioned, and the motivation behind the enablers, this is all about Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the attempt to identify the assets of Russian oligarchs. So it really went through the House and was added on quite quickly without not a lot of debate. I have to admit, it took me by surprise. So we are really waging an effort to stop it from being included in the NDA passed by the Senate. And again, given the Mr. Toomey's position, the ranking Republican on the Senate Banking Committee, we're feeling pretty optimistic. But let's reinforce that tomorrow. Okay, Mara, down to you. There's this thing called ESG going around. It has permutations affecting both the regulatory world in the United States and internationally. And there are also legislative happenings on that, which maybe I'll ask somebody else on the panel about, because that's not where you live. But give us your take on what's happening and how concerned we should be.
Well, I think we need to separate all of the different pieces, legislative and regulatory, but also which entities we're talking about. So Karen told me this morning she had asked Chairman Gensler some questions about the ESG proposal that he didn't answer. So we can talk about that. The SEC has a proposal out for ESG disclosure by funds and advisors. And to the SEC's credit, this one really is focused on products and services that are held out as incorporating or considering ESG factors. I say to their credit because in Europe, they took a different path on disclosure and went down sort of what I would call a name and shame approach. If you are not considering ESG factors, if you are not offering sustainable strategies, you have to say why. You have to talk about principal adverse impacts. And so there's a little bit of name and shame because it's really meant to drive the market and drive strategies towards sustainable ones. Here, I think what the SEC was trying to do is just, look, it's confusing, people don't understand this stuff, some clients want ESG strategies, and we should all be required to disclose enough information that they can sort out what it is we do relative to what our competitors do. I think conceptually the SEC got that right. The biggest challenge, I think, in that proposal is that they oversimplified what some of these strategies can look like. And so what they think is relatively simple disclosure is going to start to look like a phone book in your ADV or your fund disclosures. But that's what the comment period is for. Hopefully we'll thin that down. And I think they're right to focus on ESG disclosures for investment strategies. This is a hot topic, and we should be telling our clients what it is we do and don't do.
Jeff, you want to talk a little bit about other aspects of it, including what's
Absolutely.
going on Capitol Hill?
Well, you know, obviously, ESG it's a contentious issue. I don't know if you saw, but this last week, your chairman was before the House Financial Services Committee, Jamie Dimon, and he was asked, are you going to live up to your commitments and cut off, which by 2050 you support zero carbon, and are you going to cut off all energy companies today? And to his credit, he said, absolutely not. That would be hell for America. And so so this issue has proponents and on both sides that are becoming more and more aggressive. States are becoming aggressive. The state of Texas has inquired at our funds not investing in energy and gun companies. And at Schwab, we've had to certify that we were not disinvesting in these entities. And so it puts a lot of pressure on fund managers. How do we navigate this environment? Clearly, there needs to be some standardization, but it's hard to do. I mean, world events impact ESG. You know, you just mentioned the Russian invasion. The Russian invasion has changed the definition of ESG in Europe because now pro-defense companies are viewed as ESG because, as came out of Finland, how do you have ESG if you don't have a country? And so the idea that, you know, so that this shows you that, events are shaping this thing. This is an amorphous concept out there that, is moving in different directions.
And Jeff, another question that Jamie Dimon got asked, and it resulted in a rather testy exchange, was whether our ESG funds had any Russia exposure. But, in 2020, when you were designing those funds, there are sustainable companies in Russia.
The Supreme Court decisions have an impact. Obviously, the Dobbs decision on reproductive rights has caused companies to have to change their social policies with respect to employees. Are you going to finance their ability to go other states? And then the West Virginia versus EPA decision. Obviously, it used the major decisions doctrine to say that an agency can't act unless Congress specifically authorized authority for that. Well, the SEC has proposed a rather comprehensive climate disclosure rule where you'd be hard-pressed to go in the 34 and 33 Acts and find anywhere that it says they have authority in this area. And of course, one of the commissioners has pointed that out in detail in her dissent to the proposal, which really sets up a roadmap for litigation on this. So you can see, when you look at this issue, there are no fixed points. This is going to continue to move and change, and I think a lot more is going to happen, but we do need some standardization. We need to know the rules of the road here, and as of right now, we don't have them.
Langston, there seems to be a lot of hostility from Republicans on Capitol Hill to fund and advisors considering ESG as a factor, especially with regard to ERISA. And I believe there are some legislative proposals out there. Tell me what you think is going to happen with them, either in this Congress or, as it strikes me, more likely to gain traction in the next. How do you see it?
Well, I think as it relates to this Congress, there's just not much that's going to happen much more coming out of that committee. I think that moving forward, and you may have seen the McHenry as part of kind of the Jobs 4.0, if you will, that he wants to push starting in Q1 of next year if the House does flip. And there are certain bills that he wants to consider, and whether it be their accredited investor bill is one that is incredibly important. They have several bills actually that Republicans have been working on. The one that you all may have seen that is within his current jobs package, Jobs 4.0 package, is actually one that is bipartisan, and there are Democrats that are signed up for it. So it's something, when we look at his Jobs 4.0 package and moving forward on deregulating, increasing capital access for small businesses and entrepreneurs, he's looking at bills that Chair Waters currently may not have sponsored, but he's also looking at bills that will get some bipartisan support, some of them, not all. And so we are likely to see a lot of capital access bills, deregulatory bills coming through the committee, specifically as it relates to capital formation. Now, whether that makes its way through the Senate, it's a different situation, especially if the current state of affairs continues to be with Senator Brown as chair of the Senate Banking Committee. I will say that as it relates to Gensler and other regulatory heads, oversight is the way we've been told, and what we've been told as it relates to what McHenry plans on doing, and really taking to task what we've heard up here, particularly as it relates to some of the SEC rules and regulations, some that may come into effect maybe by the end of the year or next year. I think that the administration wants to be pretty aggressive and moving forward, understanding that politically the House may flip, they may not have full control So that is going to be part of it, and I think there's going to be a lot of pushback, and not only from lawsuits from the external side, if you will, outside of Congress, but within Congress, there's going to be a lot of pushback from the Republican side. From that, I mean, and so that is something you're likely to see. I think that you're also likely to see issues around, there's a data privacy bill that's been really important that the Financial Services Committee is working currently with the Engineering and Commerce Committee on. So there's a lot that is going to come out of the, I think, the Financial Services Committee in Q1 and Q2. That is, I think, important. A lot of language we haven't necessarily seen, but I think it's something that this group should definitely pay attention to. And also engaging in pushback on the regulatory agencies, particularly SEC, as it relates to some of the rules that they're looking to set in place post-comment period.
And just to clarify for you all, Patrick McHenry, Republican from North Carolina, is the ranking member, which is to say the most senior Republican on the House Financial Services Committee. He's made clear his interest in becoming chair of that committee if the House flips, as is certainly looking likely. We certainly have a relationship with him. He's a very important fella, and he put out an agenda just yesterday, his capital markets agenda. I should also add that I was at a fundraiser for him not too long ago, where I delivered a check from the Investment Advisor Association Political Action Committee, and we were talking about Mr. Gensler's very ambitious agenda, and he was talking about, boy, he sure would like to slow it down some, and one of the ways he's planning to do so is to have Gensler in front of that committee as often as possible, just so he's not back at his office working. Specific Bill Langston, I know there's a bill that has been introduced and will be reintroduced in the next Congress specifically that would disallow advisors from considering non-pecuniary factors for ERISA plans. It would also affect advisors' consideration of so-called non-pecuniary factors for their clients unless they have an explicit approval to do so. Do you see that legislation moving next year?
Through both chambers, that may be somewhat difficult. But I think it has I think with the right push, it can really, I think you could get, I mean, there is a dynamic there on both sides. But I do think there is an opportunity for it to get done, particularly from in the House and moving forward. I think there's some conversations that be had in the Senate.
You know,
And some push to be had in the Senate.
I'm not so sure there's a need. I mean, you're fiduciaries, and you make decisions on your clients' investments based on what you think a fiduciary, your reasonable judgment, what you think should be the right investments. And I don't know why that precludes other things other than necessarily pecuniary matters. So I'm not sure this is a settled issue. I know there's a lot of discussion about this issue, but I would suspect that the courts wouldn't necessarily agree.
And I should make clear, IEA is steadfastly opposed to any regulation, law, policy that would restrict your ability to make investment decisions as fiduciaries for your clients. And that whether it's ESG, active, passive, we want you and feel very strongly that you should be able to exercise your responsibility as fiduciaries unfettered, unlimited by any governmental policy. And that is a fight that we are involved in. We need your support on it, and it's going to continue, and it's going to manifest itself in different ways, both legislative and regulatorily. Okay. Jeff, I know you want to talk a little bit about crypto rules coming out of the SEC. Give me your
Sure.
take and
You know,
Schwab's take on that.
It's a sad state of affairs, but all of us know about cybercrime and it was cyber, not crypto.
I'm sorry.
But in any case, so cybercrime, we're all aware of this. It's an ongoing problem. I mean, I don't know if a day goes by at Schwab where there aren't multiple attempts to hack our systems and take our clients' information or their money. And and so as the SEC, puts out rules, one thing I think you need to understand is when they're putting on rules that aims at investment advisors, it's because of your success that these rules are coming together. It's because your assets under management has grown so dramatically that they then think we've got to do more. We've got to impose more regulation on this group. That is obviously one of the most successful corners of the financial world. And so, in February, the SEC put out a proposed rule that largely mirrors what cyber risk management practices are imposed on banks, big broker-dealers. It really isn't very different. It's the same type of language. It's from a high level. You'll have to have written policies and procedures that you'll have to implement. You'll have to have reporting obligations that within 48 hours of an incident, you'll have to report to the SEC about it, even though you're probably still trying to figure out what it is. And that becomes a problem. You'll have to enhance your disclosures so that you can tell your clients about the incidents. And then you're going to have to maintain, and retain cybersecurity related books and records. So, this is just another panoply of regulation that's going to fit on top of what you already do. And to the credit of the IAA, you've written a very comprehensive and thorough comment letter to the SEC. I think you make very strong points about various things that you're concerned about, concerns about the very placement of the rule proposal itself is in the anti-fraud provisions of the rules governing investment advisors, which means that if you had a small violation, you could be charged with manipulative, deceptive, and what is it, the phrase? Oh, and manipulative, deceptive, and fraudulent acts and practices. Well, that's not necessarily what you intended to do, but you could have a violation and not have followed your procedures in some way. The IAA challenges the idea that there needs to be a 48-hour window for reporting. Often the advisor's not going to know necessarily the details in that period of time, and yet they'll be under an obligation to report immediately, within a narrow window. I think you'd have to, one of the things is you need to have written agreements with your third-party systems providers. Often, advisors have to use, whether it's storing information in the cloud or other information providers that you'll have to negotiate obligations on them, that you're required to oversee. Well, many small advisors are not going to have the ability to negotiate contracts with large IT providers. It's just not going to happen. So I think that's an unreasonable obligation that would be imposed on you. These are all just kind of like examples of an agency that knows, they're a hammer and they see a nail and they're going to hit it, and so it's like imposing the types of programs that they use in other areas, other entities like Schwab, and imposing it on small advisors. It's not appropriate, and hopefully they'll listen to your comments, although I'm not optimistic.
Although there was a very interesting dialogue that Karen Barr had with Chair Gensler this morning that all of you witnessed. Okay, we're going to cover a couple more issues reasonably quickly, and then I want to open it up for some questions and answers. Mara, what more can we say about Chair Gensler and the SEC's very ambitious agenda? And as you know, IAA and all of you, I imagine, are concerned not only about certain aspects of the rules taken by themselves, but the cumulative impact. Mara, what is your take from your small advisory firm?
Right, so cumulative impact is a big one. There have been 38 proposals out of the SEC this year, 16 in the first quarter. The last time there were that many in the first quarter was 2011, right after Dodd-Frank, when the agency was completing its mandates. Since then, the next highest number, 4. 16 proposals in the first quarter, 38 so far, over 8,000 pages, over 5,000 embedded questions in each of these proposals. Our team reads all of them, right? I mean, pretty much any one of those proposals will apply to JP Morgan. A number of them will not apply to some of your firms, but they may have knock-on impacts if we're talking about the equity markets, fixed income markets, dealer registration. All of these things have the potential to impact markets that we all invest in. And I think our biggest concern is even at a firm like JP Morgan, it's really hard to read all of these proposals, think about them thoughtfully, and engage in the comment process. That's what the comment process is for. It's a requirement under the Administrative Procedures Act that the agencies seek public comment, but when you have 8,000 pages of proposals on your desk, it's pretty hard to do it thoughtfully. And I think it's pretty hard for the staff to write them thoughtfully, too. I mean, the word on the street is people at the SEC are tired and working really hard. And so the concern is not even so much the volume of regulation, but the quality.
And notwithstanding Chair Gensler's comments this morning in response to Karen's questions, saying that his pace was comparable to those of previous chairs, there's been a front-end loading in this process, and which is almost unprecedented, as Mara just pointed out.
If can I give you one more number here?
But the rules themselves are also enormously complex and consequential.
I have one more interesting fact. So you may remember Chair Gensler was the chairman of the CFTC when they implemented Title VII of the Dodd-Frank Act and basically moved the entire derivatives market from OTC to centrally cleared, which in hindsight it's hard to argue that was not a good thing. But we counted something like 150 corrective actions after his agenda went through. So FAQs, interpretive guidance, no action letters, exemptive orders, all of the things you have to do if your regulation doesn't perfectly hit the mark and you have to go back and clarify. And this is his MO. He's okay with these regulations being less than perfect, and it's a little worrisome.
Yeah, I heard it described by a congressman to me. He's flooding the zone. And that's, exactly what he's doing. He's making it so difficult to understand all the different rules. What are the interactions between these various rules? Nobody's had time to act. You're trying to figure out the rules themselves, let alone how they interact with one another. And then a particular problem for me is the market structure changes he's proposing that each and every one of your clients' order executions could be subject to a dramatically different regime if he gets his way.
I can tell you that Gail Bernstein and IA's legal team are just working almost around the clock in order to represent your interests and get out some very thoughtful comment letters. But the strain that all of you are feeling, certainly we are feeling too, and we greatly appreciate your engagement on these issues because you help inform our comment letters and help make them as intelligent and influential as I believe they are. Okay, 2 more issues quickly. Jim, I know you wanted to touch upon cryptocurrencies issues. Now, of course, Congressman Himes, I think, made some very thoughtful comments about the stablecoin legislation and where that stands. Do you have anything you want to add on that one?
Crypto regulation is a mess. Look, I think the White House put out an executive order that was a pretty significant regulatory punt. The reports that they've requested back from all the agencies have been coming in tranches. I think we had a tranche a week ago. FSOC's supposed to vote on their recommendations. And so none of that's self-executing. So I think we are a long way from getting clarity over what's in the commodities bucket, what's in the securities bucket. And Congress, I think, while there's been a lot of talk about regulating payment stablecoins, and there were negotiations going on in the House of giving the Federal Reserve oversight of payment stablecoins, there are just too many stakeholders. There are states that are in the game. There are other agencies that want a voice, like Chair Gensler in the SEC, and I just think it's going to take a while to land that plane. There's some major legislative proposals in the Senate that have sought to start the dialogue by creating a framework. There seems to be at least a lot of interest in the Senate Agricultural Committee's desire to put some framework around what should be in the CFTC bucket. So I would just say there's a long way to go, and I think there's a risk to American leadership in the space, because you are seeing foreign jurisdictions allowing products. For instance, the SEC has an approved registered product for spot-priced cryptocurrencies, and we at Fidelity have been able. Fidelity Canada has launched some of those types of products. So, I think it's a discussion that's going to continue. You have a lot of folks who are engaged in the space that Chair Gensler thinks are trading securities, and so I wouldn't be surprised if the SEC were looking and investigating, and has more to come on that front too.
And I would just add that the dynamic between the CFTC and the SEC when it comes to regulation in this area, whether cryptocurrencies are commodities, CFTC jurisdiction, or securities, SEC, also reflects Capitol Hill, where the CFTC and commodities are under the jurisdiction of the Agriculture Committees in the House and Senate. And of course, the SEC is under the jurisdiction of the Senate Banking Committee and the House Financial Services Committee. So these are tremendously complicated. If the issue itself wasn't already complicated enough, you also have the process by which policy will be made is complicated just politically, because you have different institutions, different agencies, different chambers of Congress trying to figure out what their relationship is and who will prevail. Okay, one more issue, then we're going to open it up for questions. I think, as you have found out at this conference, that DEI is something tremendously important to the advisory community and to IAA, and we are putting a lot of effort into that area. And in fact, we worked on Capitol Hill, and a piece of legislation was developed with our support, H.R. 2123, the beautifully named Diversity and Inclusion, Data Accountability and Transparency Act. Langston, did you name that one?
No, I
Okay. In any case, this is a bill that would allow offices of minority and women inclusion in the various financial service agencies, which were created under the Dodd-Frank Act, to collect data about diversity in their regulated industries. And this bill would allow OMWIs to collect this data from, among others, investment advisors with more than 100 employees. We feel that this foundational data is just terribly important and is necessary before other measures should even be considered, like a Rooney Rule, which is something that has been out there for investment advisors. Langston, I was at a meeting in your office not 2 weeks ago with the chair of the House Financial Services DEI Subcommittee, Congressman Joyce Spady from Ohio, who is also chair of the Congressional Black Caucus. What do you see coming out of Congress on DEI?
This year, not much. I think that it's frankly winding down. As you mentioned, Chair Beatty is the chair of not only the Subcommittee on Diversity and Inclusion on the Financial Services Committee, but the only committee or subcommittee in Congress that focuses squarely in around diversity and inclusion issues. I say that to say that if there is any particular committee or subcommittee that is focusing on bills that you mentioned that the IAA supports and others, it comes from that committee a lot of times. And while it passes out of that committee potentially and may even move forward to the House, I don't see it going beyond that. The Senate Banking Committee, under the leadership of Chair Brown, if you will, Sherrod Brown, hasn't necessarily set up a subcommittee in that sort, and hasn't necessarily, although he really does apparently appreciate diversity and inclusion and has made that known many of times, hasn't necessarily introduced bills and things of that sort that are mirroring what you have mentioned in particular. So I will say that, so bottom line, moving forward, this year you're unlikely to see any legislation reach the president's desk as it relates to specifically on issues around diversity and inclusion, particularly the bill that IAA supports, unfortunately. But I do think moving forward into next year, if the House does flip, one of the things, and while it's not confirmed, one of the things that we did hear is that that subcommittee may be disbanded altogether, and that the ranking member, McHenry, who would become the chair, would not necessarily alleviate all discussions around diversity and inclusion, but use it as an opportunity to allow it to permeate in all the different subcommittees. There was just a different thought that having a subcommittee that focuses on it may not be a way to go about it, because it seems to permeate into every single aspect of all the different committees, and so, or subcommittees, whether it be financial institutions, housing and insurance, or capital markets or the like. So it's not to say that they won't focus on it. I don't think that, and it hasn't, no decision has been made at this point, but that subcommittee could potentially be disbanded. Does that mean that bills can't be introduced last year that weren't, or this year, next year that weren't, if House power leadership flips? No. You can still introduce that bill. That bill can potentially move forward or be amended. Things can still move in that direction without the subcommittee. But just structurally, that is one of the things that we've heard. Hasn't been confirmed, but it's just something to keep in mind.
And that subcommittee, by the way, does not have long history. It was created at the start of this current Congress under the leadership of Chair Maxine Waters. Okay, we have 4 or 5 minutes. I apologize for not leaving more time, and I know we have a couple microphones. If you want to raise your hand, I'm sure we can get a mic your way to ask a question.
I have a question about what you, Langston, called oversight by House Republicans on the Financial Services Committee. If they're in the leadership of the committee next year with the GOP takeover of the House, they do want to put pressure on Gensler and haul him up to the Hill for hearings, but as a practical matter, how much influence can House Republicans have on the SEC agenda? Because the SEC is an independent agency, and as long as President Biden is in office, the SEC can do whatever it wants. So the GOP can huff and puff, but can they blow any regulatory houses down?
I like the way you put that towards the end. I may use that. I'll attribute it to you once, but that's it. No, I think that, I think you're absolutely right. And this is where policy and politics kind of mix, in a sense. I think, and others may have thoughts on this on the stage. I don't want to steal thunder, but what I will say is, yeah, right. I mean, there's going to be even more of a push if the House flips for the agencies to kind of, and particularly the SEC, is to be more aggressive in moving forward, if not through rulemaking, through enforcement. With that said, while Gensler is called up, there's only so much browbeating and hand slapping that you can do, because that's not going to change his mind or his staff's mind as far as moving forward on legislation. What they can do is tie the narrative as they move forward into a 2024, with the point being, this is why you need to get rid of this entire administration and go Republican or switch over, because what these rules are doing, what these enforcement actions are doing, are causing a lot of disruption and disarray to the country, economic and markets. And this is what we would do differently. So it's almost tying it into a narrative, if you will, that's more political, looking forward down the line to 2024, as to why Gensler should not be in that place, as to why other subcommittee chairs, agency chairs should not be where they are, versus browbeating for the sake of browbeating, or browbeating to get him to go back and say, look, Republicans told me to do this, we have to do this now. I mean, that's not going to happen. So I get your point well taken, but I think it's more political.
Yep. I fully agree with Langston. I think there's one other potential hook is we're probably looking at split control of Washington after the elections, and so there are going to have to be agreements on things like funding. And you can see appropriations when Chair Gensler has to go pitch for his budget, and they say, there can be riders on appropriations bills that say no funds shall be used by the SEC to do X, Y, and Z. And just the threat of that sometimes but it comes back to public pressure.
Right.
It's still a bully pulpit pressure.
And I don't
got
know
one
if
more.
Gensler said it today, but every time I've seen it, he says he doesn't have enough people working at the SEC. So He's obviously going to be asking for more budget, more people, and the Republicans can easily say, no way for that. You're doing all these crazy rules. We're not going to do that.
And one more that I'll just add is there is some element of running out the clock. If he spends a lot of time on Capitol Hill, that's time he's not spending holding open meetings and adopting rules, and you get to a certain point, particularly with 2024 elections, where it gets much harder to do rules, where you have Congressional Review Act possibilities for rules being overturned. So that can slow things down too.
Other questions?
So where does 1.1 billion go from Morgan Stanley and others? Where does that go? As a legislative matter, they're collecting a fine of 1.1 billion. Does that go into the general?
I believe that goes into the Treasury. It does not go into the enforcement
into
agency's budget. And that's a matter of policy. You do not want to give agencies an incentive to collect vast amounts of money just so they can. Yes, yeah. That goes into the general Treasury.
So with all the rulemakings, you have to do the economic analysis. And so I've been hearing that that's going to be potentially a fatal flaw for the SEC, and a lot of because there's no way they can do the economic analysis necessary to support the rules. I think I've read some good articles on that. Have y'all heard anything about groups that are kind of mobilizing to challenge some of the rules on that basis?
Yeah, on certain of the rulemakings, affecting private funds and all, there's been a lot of questions about that. And certainly the West Virginia EPA Supreme Court case sort of opened the door to challenges to regulatory agencies. So I think Chair Gensler is expecting that there's going to be legal challenge, and one of the reasons he's trying to push the rules through so quickly is so he can be there to defend them. But certainly one of the bases for these challenges will be perceived inadequacies in the economic analysis. So time has run down, and I am the last person who's going to want to stand or sit between you and a reception. But before I let everyone go here, and before we thank them, let me make a couple quick announcements. First of all, it's been a terrific day. Thank you for being here and helping celebrate our IA's 85th anniversary with us. I think we've had some wonderful speakers, including those at this panel, but Chair Gensler, Congressman Himes, all of the panelists. And I'm hoping that this has been valuable to you and your firms. We've talked about any number of issues, the current market, certainly the political environment, social issues, all of which will make us better prepared to face Capitol Hill tomorrow on Advisor Advocacy Day. A couple notes there. One, there's going to be a breakfast here at 8 o'clock. That should run to 8:30. Please don't be late to it, because right after we're doing a half-hour briefing. I'll be doing that, and it's going to be important. The first meeting of the day, there's a single meeting of the day at 9:30, but the buses aren't going to start running to shuttle you from the hotel to Capitol Hill until 9 o'clock. That's not going to be in time. So that first group, there's a meeting, I think, with Senator Murphy from Connecticut. So it's going to be you Connecticuticians, like Laura Drinan over here. I think they'll be joined by Gail Bernstein. You're probably going to cab over to that meeting. Everyone else will be able to use the shuttles. They start running at 9 on that wonderful Advocacy Associates app that you have. There's the schedule for the buses. Plus, that's the schedule for the buses will be in the materials, in the booklets and brochures we're handing out to you tomorrow morning. So I don't care whether you're here at the breakfast. Just be here for the briefing at 8:30. Finally, as I mentioned, there's going to be a reception right after this, right on the other side of this wall, I am told. So if you come around to the hall and head that away, please join us for a reception. And now it is time for us to thank this wonderful panel that we had assembled. Thank you, Jeff, Langston, Jim, Mara.